so questions and answers. So we will have breaks for questions periodically throughout. We're going to try to keep most of the questions for the end, but if there are really sort of key questions that are relevant at different points in the session, we'll try to address those quickly. We would ask you to send us your questions primarily, so we have an email address where we will be accepting those questions. So the email address is casechallenge@iarpa.gov, and we have people here in the room with me who are triaging those and keeping track of those. If you just label that with the subject WebEx question, we'll be able to quickly identify that and put those into the queue of questions that we will answer and address. The other way that we will accept questions is through the chat window. So anytime throughout this talk, you can log a question through there. When you're doing that, please select to everyone. So you're basically sharing your question with everyone participating in the WebEx. And that should be sort of the top option on your menu to share with everyone. We also have the email address at the bottom of every slide. So if you kind of forget what it is, just refer to the slide that's being presented on the screen. All right, so our goals for today. Really, we want to explain kind of what we're expecting out of this challenge. So our vision for what we hope to get out of it, the goals, why we're doing it, so the background, and our sort of expectations for what's going to come out of this. We also want to provide you information about what we expect the awards or the prize purse to be, as well as scoring criteria. And importantly, we really want to invite questions and feedback. This is really important to us at this stage because we really want to clarify our vision for the challenge, the goals, as well as the background information. And we want to make sure that that's coming through clearly to you who's on the call today, but also to other people who will be really sort of finding out about the challenge much later on. Your questions now can help us really shape and clarify so that we can get a really sort of wide participation in this challenge and really everyone can understand what we hope to get out of this. All right, so moving along, a background about the CASE challenge. So really what we're hoping or what we're aiming for in this challenge is really what we say on the screen here. So the CASE challenge will invite solvers to develop novel, valid, reliable, and repeatable ways to measure the performance of credibility assessment techniques and technologies. So we've chosen each one of those words very carefully, and really what we mean here is by novel, we want new approaches. We want new, innovative, and creative approaches. We want methods that are valid, so ones that where measures measure what it's supposed to measure, where it sort of looks like something that, how we would expect credibility to behave or sort of act or be observed in the real world, and it would actually predict things that it's supposed to be related to. We want methods that are reliable, so we want them to be sort of consistent results across conditions and when applied across different people. And we want them to be repeatable. So in the hands of someone else, we want that person to be able to really sort of replicate and see sort of similar outcomes. So these are sort of critical criteria that we've chosen, and we'll talk about these throughout the next hour or two. So what exactly do we mean by credibility assessment? So credibility assessment, as we're using it in the context of the challenge, is really, it's a complex way of assessing both a person as well as their information. So it includes evaluating someone's truthfulness or their deception, as well as their trustworthiness. It could be evaluating things like their motivations, considerations about what may be withheld or concealed. And we can even think about sort of credibility evolving over time. So credibility assessment is a very sort of complex collection of ways that, again, we evaluate either a person, but also their information. So today, credibility assessment techniques, such as the polygraph, are difficult to sort of measure and compare against one another. So what we're really lacking is a sort of standardized, repeatable method with good validity and reliability that allows us to compare many different credibility assessment techniques and technologies. There are many different methods that are out there, but there are sort of limitations to the different ones that are out there, and we'll talk about some of that today. So the challenge here that I'm posing to you today, that we're hoping to take on in the CASE challenge, is really focused on developing new methods to evaluate how well these credibility assessment techniques work. Both credibility assessment techniques of today, as well as future ones that maybe haven't even been developed or are sort of in development now. So they should be ones that are really agnostic to the specific credibility assessment technique or technology, but that, again, address a lot of the limitations that we have in some of our methods today. So again, I really want to underscore this point, that this challenge is not focused on developing new credibility assessment techniques or testing existing credibility assessment techniques. And to really hone in on this point, I want to provide a couple examples of what we're not focused on in this challenge. So things we are not focused on here, the polygraph. We're not focused on other tools that people have developed and tested to assess credibility, such as ocular movements or pupillometry, or things like movement or fidget detection, or even things like linguistic analysis or other aspects of speech, or even sort of things like new questioning techniques or ways to elicit information. So these are not what we're focused on in the challenge. We're focused on all of the different methods that one uses to give people the experience and the opportunity to be credible or not credible, which can then be evaluated by some of these techniques. But again, we are not focused on these current or future sort of credibility assessment techniques and technologies. All right, so taking a step back a little bit, so who cares about credibility? Well, quite frankly, all of us do. So it's something that we all face in our personal lives every day as well as in our professional lives. We care about whether the people around us are reliable, whether they're honest, whether they're trustworthy. And we also care whether their information is reliable and honest and trustworthy. So it really does extend not only from the person, but also to an evaluation of their actions as well as the information or kind of what they say. So in the government context, credibility assessment is used across a range of applications. So IARPA sits in the federal government, and we care a lot about assessing credibility of people, particularly when we do things like hire new individuals, so in sort of the personnel screening context. So for example, the U.S. federal government, as reported by the National Research Council in 2003, administers thousands of polygraph tests each year. And this is just one tool that we can use to assess credibility. So it's done at a very large scale at the federal government, but it's also done at the state and local level. And it's also being done in the private sector as well. So there are a variety of different specific applications. So what I just talked about, sort of personnel screening, so figuring out whether this is the right person to hire for a particular job, whether they're going to be trustworthy, whether they have, whether they're forthcoming and forthright with their information. It's also used in law enforcement context, so for criminal investigations to vet kind of information as well as people and the information that they're providing. As well as in source vetting. So when we're trying to evaluate, is this a credible person and is their information credible, really trying to get at whether that overall is information that is to be believed and is to be trusted. All right, so kind of moving along into kind of everyday uses of credibility assessment techniques. So it's really broken down into, or in the research context, it's really kind of broken down into two different areas. So one is issue specific. So in one of these contexts, when we're sort of assessing sort of the credibility of a person or their information, we're really focused on kind of a specific act, so a specific issue. So one example that we provide here is really sort of after someone has committed a crime and maybe there's a law enforcement investigation happening, a specific act or specific question would be on, did you see the victim on Monday? So asking someone who may have been around or seen or observed anything related to the crime. So it's really tightly focused on a particular issue. Oftentimes these are retrospective in nature, so looking back in time. So a week ago, did you see this? A month ago, did you see this? 2 hours ago, did you see this sort of thing? And oftentimes this sort of use of credibility assessment techniques are in sort of this criminal and civil investigation, so in this more sort of law enforcement context. And in our evaluation of the literature, this is predominantly what we see being tackled in the research. So most evaluation protocols that we do see out there, so most methods to evaluate credibility assessment techniques are really focused on verifying and validating techniques that help us get at issue-specific use cases. Now, in contrast to this, we have what we categorize as sort of screening-based techniques or screening-based uses. So in screening-based uses of credibility assessment techniques, typically the questions are more generic in nature. So they may be asking about something where the person may not really know whether they're guilty or or whether they're, intending to be sort of forthright and forthcoming. So, for instance, in sort of the example we have here, do you intend to comply with your non-disclosure agreement? So you can imagine this being asked in a hiring situation where it's really critical that someone may keep, trade secrets for a particular company. So do you intend to comply with this? It's sort of this prospective or looking forward in time, and it's really difficult for someone to make a really sort of clear, accurate response about this, and then on the back end for us to be able to verify that response, right? It requires us kind of being clairvoyant and looking forward in time. So typically, these kind of use cases will look both retrospective, so they will look in the past, but also prospectively, as I mentioned, so kind of getting at future intentions. Oftentimes, these kind of screening-based uses of credibility assessment techniques, or predominantly in the federal government, these are used for screening for future employees, or even screening for existing employees in kind of an ongoing continual evaluation kind of way. So these are not just used by the federal government, they're used by other sectors. So the private sector, for instance, will sort of evaluate potential candidates, particularly for trusted positions, but the federal government is really a large consumer or a large user of this type of credibility assessment evaluations. And really what we see when we look across the literature is that there's relatively fewer studies looking at validating techniques that will help in this kind of screening context. So while there's a lot of research around looking at evaluating credibility assessment techniques for kind of specific issues, there's relatively less looking at it for this kind of screening-based use case. All right, so where do we stand in kind of the state of the science for credibility assessment techniques? Well, there are a variety of ways that organizations such as the U.S. government have tried to study and evaluate both the credibility of individuals and their information. So we'll kind of walk through a little bit of these. And I'm just going to introduce kind of our breakout of these here, and then we'll go into these in a little bit more detail on the subsequent slides. So on the first hand, we really have what we consider to be kind of traditional research. So research that is sort of laboratory-based. They're typically conducted in kind of well-controlled environments, so not necessarily in a lab, as we may sort of think about in this kind of clean, controlled, very academic environment, but in a well-controlled environment where we're able to control some of the variables, have comparisons against them, and really begin to evaluate kind of credibility assessment techniques so that we can, one, generalize the findings to other uses, so other real-world applications or potentially other populations, and because we have control over some of the variables, we can begin to understand causality. So not just that these two outcomes happen to occur simultaneously, but that we can really understand, it's because of specific individual differences, for instance, in an individual that they might respond in a certain way, or we're able to detect whether they're credible or not. So really trying to get at these kind of causal relationships. So the second kind of category of research that we see are really protocols that are run in what we call the field. So these are really just sort of evaluations of credibility assessment techniques that are done in kind of natural conditions. So in a location that is representative of how we might use this under real-world conditions. It might be in a time and under other kind of physical conditions, which would be represented in how we might really assess these things in real application and real operations. And typically we're evaluating the performance of these techniques or technologies where, a participant may be behaving in ways that we would expect, a real person going through these evaluations to behave. So oftentimes, if you think about someone going through a new hire screening process, they might be nervous, they might be stressed out because this is sort of a job that they have to get through these hurdles to be accepted into. Maybe there's environmental conditions that we're sort of evaluating. So we can think about different technologies that may be measuring a person where things like light or temperature may be important. So we want to carefully and closely mimic those conditions. Or in situations maybe where we're working with foreign populations. So maybe there's an interpreter that we have to understand how well the techniques work when there's kind of this language barrier, when there's this translation happening. So this is sort of what we capture or call kind of these field-based protocols. So when we look across kind of what we have to offer in terms of lab-based studies, there are a variety of ways in which people have done this research. And I'm sure many of you participating today have either taken part of this or read the literature and know the really rich, decades-long research that has gone into really some clever and creative ways to evaluate existing and kind of in development credibility assessment techniques and technologies. So here listed are just a couple examples, and there's many more in the literature, but there's different methods that revolve around basically individuals committing kind of a mock crime. So we can imagine about participants coming into a study or a laboratory environment where they are told that they will be stealing a jewel or stealing a piece of jewelry. There's also ones where they have to basically plant a bomb, a simulated bomb, and then they're going to be asked about it later. So this is kind of what we sort of capture under this category of mock crime. There's other studies that have looked at people who are explicitly cheating or helping others in cheating. So this is another way in which people will demonstrate or behave in ways that are sort of credible or not credible, and then they are asked about it at a later point. There's another set of protocols that are based on kind of breaking an object either intentionally or by accident, and then being sort of asked about it later on. And then there's another sort of set of protocols that are related to people sharing sort of personal information, kind of an experience they had or specific details about themselves or their life, or potentially even kind of getting a new skill or acquiring sort of new knowledge or expertise about something, and then being asked later whether this is true information, whether this is a true experience. And again, this is just a limited snapshot of the literature. There's many other kinds of protocols, but the idea being where the researchers are sort of giving participants, research participants, study participants, an experience that allows them to demonstrate that they are credible or not credible, and then at a later point they are sort of asked about it. So one example of this came from a study in 2006, and you can sort of read here where these were basically instructions to the participants in the study where they indicate, at the end of this you will go through an evaluation of whether you're lying or not. But first we're going to ask you to participate in this mock crime, and then certain individuals, you will lie about it. In some cases, participants were asked not to lie about it or be truthful. But prior to going through this evaluation of whether you're lying, you will go through the series of steps. So in this case, go outside, locate a mock bomb, and place it next to a nearby road. This gives the individuals this experience of kind of committing this mock crime, and then afterwards they're going to go through this lie detector test, and they're instructed to basically lie about the incident and lie that they didn't actually, or try to convince the interviewer that they did not actually place the bomb next to the road. This is kind of the general sort of way that these studies are run. So just kind of walking through what a sample experiment might look like. Participants will come into the study. They'll be recruited through various different kinds of means. They'll complete some kind of informed consent document. So this will lay out sort of what's expected, what they'll be engaging in over the course of the next set of steps that they'll go through. That informed consent will sometimes be more informative, so it will tell them everything that they're going to go through. And in other cases, there will be sort of less information with the purpose of really trying to give someone a more authentic experience and let them kind of believe the overarching narrative about what they're going through a little bit more thoroughly. And then they're officially enrolled in the study. So then once participants are actually enrolled in the study, they're typically assigned to a group, so whether they will actually sort of be asked to lie or be forthcoming about their information. In some cases, some experiments have actually allowed a participant to choose whether they're going to lie or not at the back end about actions or behaviors that they've done. But in most cases, they are kind of randomly assigned to one group or another, and this really helps in the statistical analysis. This helps us kind of have equal groups, so people who are, in one case lying or not lying. It helps us have a really good understanding at the end of the study about how robust and reliable the results are. So after individuals have typically been kind of randomly assigned to a group, then they will actually go through a set of actions. So in the prior example, the person would actually be asked to kind of place the bomb in a roadside location. So this is a series of actions that they are asked to go through, sort of directions that they complete. And these are typically defined as sort of correct or not correct, good or bad, credible or not credible. Sort of, in some cases, if you're giving someone a new experience, so like having a direct first-person experience versus observing someone else, or in the instance of cheating, whether you were the person who's cheating yourself, or maybe you are observing someone else next to you cheating, or maybe they asked you to help them cheat. So the sum total of the actions that someone goes through is really kind of at the core of the methods and the core of the protocol in which we're seeking in this challenge. In some cases, some experiments have actually allowed a participant to kind of sort of choose whether they are going to kind of be credible or not, or let's say in the example of sort of the mock crime, whether they're going to truly commit the crime or not. So some people have tried to sort of experimentally provide participants with that kind of experience. But largely people are sort of assigned to kind of one group or not. So following this set of actions, then oftentimes people are brought to kind of a separate room or separate location, and they're asked about, did you commit this crime? Did you cheat? And this is where we see, if people have been instructed to lie, they attempt to lie, or if they've been instructed to, be forthcoming with their information, they are, trying to convince a person, a machine, whatever it may be, that they are credible. So here's where we really get sort of the demonstration of whether a person is trying to be credible or whether they are not credible. And a person, or as I said, kind of some kind of tool or technology is trying to make that determination. So then following this, participants will sort of receive their compensation, they'll get debriefed on what happened during the experiment and why everything occurred the way that it did, questions will be answered, and they'll be sent along their way. So in some cases, participants actually get bonuses for potentially convincing, for instance, an interviewer that they were indeed credible when maybe they weren't credible. But in most cases, participants will sort of receive equal compensation regardless of what condition they were in, or whether they sort of convincingly convinced someone that they were credible or not. All right, so some of the limitations of this study, which this is by no means something novel or new that we're mentioning today. I mean, these have been sort of brought up in the literature and have been certainly recognized by many, many other researchers. But just to kind of list them out, so some of the concerns with the research here today, or with laboratory-based research, is that it's really sort of individuals have these kind of low-stakes decisions that they're making. So they have kind of low perceived consequences about any one of their actions or decisions within the context of these experiments. So they're not really sort of highly motivated. They may be motivated, but it's not really sort of personal to them. And so if they're deemed to be not credible, this is, it's something they can kind of leave in the experimental room. It doesn't sort of impact the rest of their life. And oftentimes we do motivate participants in these studies with money. So if you're credible, you will get a bonus, as I mentioned in kind of previous slides. Other people have tried to try different incentive structures that are certainly interesting to see, but a lot of it still is really sort of monetizing performance. Oftentimes, participants in these studies, they generally have kind of lower stress or emotional reactivity. And this is really important because, sort of this higher level kind of stress or emotional response or different kinds of emotions that might be activated through these kinds of protocols, that these may result in different kinds of observable behaviors or different kinds of speech patterns or different kinds of physiological responses. And so this will directly impact kind of the techniques and tools that we have to assess someone's credibility. And so it's really important to understand that a laboratory type setting may give people some kind of stress or emotional reactivity, but it may be different than what we would see in real-world context. So oftentimes in experiments, participants' credibility is sort of instructed. So as I mentioned on the couple previous slides, where someone might be assigned to a condition to either sort of lie or not lie, as one example. And so here, when you sort of assign someone to it, they don't have sort of the natural kind of process that they have to go through to decide whether they're going to lie or not, or if they are going to lie, then kind of going through the steps of maybe thinking about what that lie is going to contain. And those again have different sort of consequences for the way we would sort of behaviorally observe whether someone is lying or not. Oftentimes these laboratory protocols are sort of artificially unambiguous, so kind of a lie or in other cases kind of more generally sort of credibility is very clearly defined, and it's kind of transparent as to what it is. And it's oftentimes a very sort of simple lie or simple kind of piece of information that someone is being evaluated on. And I think we can all agree that the real world is definitely not unambiguous. So it's a lot more complicated. I think certain researchers have definitely tried to amp up kind of the complexity of lies, for instance, but this is still by and large what we see in a lot of the research today. So also what we see in sort of laboratory-based research is that kind of the rates at which people are credible or not credible don't really reflect the rates in real life. So for really kind of high-stakes, high-consequence situations, oftentimes not credible or lying is actually very low rate. And so what I mentioned on kind of the prior slide, where typically people are sort of equally assigned to groups, that doesn't really reflect what we see as real rates in the real world. So it doesn't end up that, in most populations, 50% of the people are lying, or 50% of the people are not being credible, or 50% of their information is not credible. So it helps us to kind of have ways to kind of play with those numbers, but still have really good results coming out of it. All right. So another thing that we also typically see in lab-based protocols are that the demographics of the participants are oftentimes different than kind of the population demographics that we see in real life. Oftentimes we're talking about sort of undergraduate populations, and we are by no means the first people to recognize this. This is kind of a larger call or concern in sort of the behavioral and social sciences, when we think about things like the weird problem. So subject populations that are, Western, educated, from industrialized, rich, democratic nations. So it's kind of the weird acronym. So this is not a problem that is unique to this area of research, but it is one that when we think about applying some of these techniques and technologies to the broader national security context, we really want to make sure that we understand how they work in a variety of populations at a variety of points of life, and dealing with many different sort of differences that we see in different populations. All right. So in one study that looked at this from 2004 from Dean Polina and colleagues, they actually looked at doing kind of a side-by-side comparison of mock crimes and sort of field-based studies, and actual kind of criminal investigations, so data coming out of those. And what they found was that indeed there were differences in some of the kind of, in particular, physiological activity or reactivity between participants who went through these mock crimes and were participants in these kind of real, actual sort of criminal investigations. And that these differences may indeed contribute to kind of different results and interpretations. They're not necessarily, lab studies aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves, and can certainly still be informative, but that the conclusions that we draw from those lab studies may be different from those that we draw from field-based studies or even real-life evaluations and investigations, because the way that participants are sort of motivated or engaged in studies might be slightly different. And so it really was sort of a nice comparison between the two studies, and really a call, I think, for us to think about kind of more realistic but still kind of controlled studies to evaluate credibility assessment techniques. All right, so moving on, I'm going to talk quickly about kind of field protocols, which is sort of our other category of research methods that we have today. So some examples of these, and again, not exhaustive in any stretch of the imagination, but some examples of some field-based protocols, or ones that are run in more real-world context, are that participants are participating in a real law enforcement investigation. So maybe the study is looking at, let's say, a questioning technique. So a law enforcement organization may evaluate sort of its own investigators and its use of deploying different questioning techniques in the context of actual investigation. So when they have people who they brought in for questioning and they've committed a crime, they're able to kind of test out different strategies and see how effective it is. We also see this kind of field-based evaluation of credibility assessment techniques in participants who are undergoing screenings for employment in trusted positions. So, for instance, evaluating how well kind of our personnel screening do for the federal government. There's also other ways in which we can really begin to look at behavior and our system of credibility in more real-world context. So looking at things like historical events. So looking at outcomes from, for instance, court trials or people giving testimony in court and how, you know, were they deemed to be credible sort of at the end of it, and how we might be able to look at things like speech or their nonverbal behaviors to make those estimates. There's, you know, a whole area of research looking at sort of communications and how that may reveal whether individuals are credible or not, and how we may analyze those. So, for instance, the Enron files, as well as things like public statements or filings from corporations. And other work has been done sort of more observationally, where we might look at the credibility in things like social media posts, public social media posts. Or there's even been some kind of fun work looking at things like Yelp reviews or Amazon-based reviews, and sort of how credible are they, and is there different, you know, information being conveyed in sort of linguistic-based features that can help us understand credibility. So all of these sort of capture or try to kind of closely evaluate behavior in the real world, which is why we kind of call them these field protocols. So in one study done, gosh, about 20 years ago or so, the group actually looked at real screening protocols, real screening situations for people who were looking for positions at the Atlanta airport. And they were able to kind of ask them certain questions based on past criminal behavior or things like illegal substance use, and try to verify this by then going into kind of records and doing some additional testing. So this is really sort of our evaluation of sort of real behavior in the real world, but still with some ability to have some ability to kind of verify people's credibility at the end of it. All right, so some of the limitations of field protocols. Well, there's kind of this natural trade-off with lab studies, where lab studies give us this really nice ability to kind of control the environment, control the way people behave, and control some of the specific variables in the environment. In field protocols, we don't have that level of control, and importantly, we don't have really a good way to verify really clearly what the ground truth is. So whether someone is credible or not, that's oftentimes lacking in some of these field protocols. We also don't have what we see in lab-based studies, which is kind of this random assignment of participants to different groups. So oftentimes we just have to deal with the natural expression or natural kind of prevalence of a certain behavior, so whether someone is credible or not. And oftentimes the methods are really specific to a particular field environment, and so it's hard to kind of see generalization across environments, because some of those conditions will be very different and will vary across experiments. So the other sort of challenging thing with field protocols are that it's oftentimes more challenging to introduce new techniques or technologies into them, because now we're talking about potentially real-life situations, for instance, real-life legal or law enforcement investigations. There's sort of a higher barrier of entry to introduce and test new approaches into those environments, even though it gives us kind of all of the aspects we would want, which is sort of real-life, you know, participant motivation, and sort of real-life, you know, sort of perceived consequences of being deemed not credible. And so it's oftentimes very challenging, although it has a lot of opportunities if new techniques and technologies can actually be tested in those. All right, so just a quick summary of kind of what I've talked about so far. So to date, methods to evaluate credibility assessment techniques have assessed credibility related to specific issues. They've also evaluated it relative to what we deem kind of more these screening applications, and they've been performed in both lab settings and real life, or what we're calling kind of field environments. So for the challenge, to be clear, participants can propose methods across any of those. So they can be issue-specific, they can be more screening-based, they can be conducted in a very controlled lab setting, they can be conducted in more of a field environment, but the methods we'll need to address the limitations that we've highlighted for some of these current methods. So what we don't want is just sort of the same old that we've seen before with slight variations on it. We really want this challenge to be an opportunity for people to think broadly and creatively about taking on the limitations that we've noticed and thinking of creative ways to solve them and address them using still really good, valid, reliable methods, but again, taking on some of these limitations. So why we want to have a challenge to address this? Well, we think that there's really a lot to be offered in kind of a broad population of individuals who maybe have been thinking about this problem for a while and maybe haven't been thinking about this problem for a while. So we really want to kind of reach out to new populations, to existing populations, and really try to motivate people to just think outside the box, to think creatively about how to solve this. And maybe where, certain limitations have stopped people before, kind of throw out those notions and just kind of throw something out, knowing that there's really sort of no risk, no harm in putting out a creative, clever idea. And really kind of using different experiences to inform these. So, we don't necessarily say that you have to be a behavioral scientist or a physiologist to create these methods or these protocols. We invite people with any kind of experience to kind of put forth an idea. And we think using this crowdsourcing approach is really important, and it's really a kind of unique, I think, approach to trying to find new ways, find new methods, and find new protocols, and that we don't have to decide kind of a priori who has a good idea. We can kind of launch the question out to this large crowd, and hopefully, through kind of the different ideas that come back, maybe people talking with one another, maybe working solo, we can get kind of a new set of solutions and a new set of ideas. Also, by kind of going with this challenge, there's really sort of a low barrier to entry. So as we'll talk about over the next couple slides, all we're really asking for is kind of a short paper. So write up your ideas and tell us about it. And we'll provide a template for all of this. But really, we want those barriers to be low because we want to kind of get as many ideas from as many different people from a diversity of backgrounds to really participate here. And furthermore, we really do want to cultivate and kind of sustain a longer-term community of interest here and people who are dedicated to kind of researching and advancing this topic, both from people who are really heavily invested in the research, as well as people who maybe want to adopt some of these methods, so what we term as more practitioners, but also just a broader community of interested individuals who care about doing this kind of research in a smart, thoughtful, and responsible way. All right, so if we do come out of the challenge with kind of successful solutions at the back end, what we hope to get out of this is really a new standard to use in evaluating current credibility assessment techniques today, but also future ones that are sort of in development or maybe haven't even been developed. So we really want a protocol or set of protocols that, again, are agnostic to the specific credibility assessment technique or technology and can be used, across time, kind of across technologies and approaches. It ideally would also be able to be used across government, across academia, and across industry. So for people who are really sort of invested in the research, but also for people who are kind of using these and evaluating new credibility assessment techniques and technologies. And we really want to kind of help, by sort of setting the standard protocols and methods, we want to help kind of motivate the development of next-generation credibility assessment techniques. So we think that really by knowing how you're being evaluated or what sort of the standards are, you have a better way to kind of characterize and evaluate how well a new system might be doing because you know exactly what those metrics and what those criteria are. So with that, I'm going to take a quick pause for a minute. We'll kind of review to see whether we have any questions that come in. And I'm just going to take a sip of water, so I'm just going to pause it for a moment, and then we'll pick up in about 30 seconds. All right, so we are back. So we don't have any pressing questions to address at this time, but I do just want to remind everyone, please do list your questions anytime in that chat window. Feel free to email them to us. I also want to point out, too, that even if we don't get to address your question explicitly today, we will be taking these back, and we will address them. And so we will certainly respond to them, whether it be in the context of this call today or whether it be in the future. So we're going to move on to talk about a couple of details of the challenge, just to tell you a little bit more about kind of the logistics behind. So sort of as an overview, solvers will be asked to develop protocols to measure the performance of existing or future credibility assessment techniques and technologies. So really the key here is that we're asking you to develop a protocol. So we're going to be asking for the protocol in the form of a short paper. So a short paper that will ask you to kind of list out what you're thinking, why you're thinking of the methods in this way, and then really just explain it to us. So the protocol, or this paper that people will submit, will be evaluated by a panel of scientific experts, and we'll have a set of criteria that will be very clear, and we'll kind of give you the broad strokes of that in a couple slides. And then eventually the winners, and I do say winners, plural, will be awarded prizes. So we do intend to have kind of a couple categories, or at least multiple winners, if it's deemed that we have kind of winning solutions, and we'll talk a little bit about that prize purse as well. So one thing I do want to underscore and really highlight here is that we will not be running experiments or collecting data as part of the evaluation process, and we will not expect you to run experiments or collect data as part of your submission either. So there is no experimentation happening during this challenge, either as a precondition to you submitting something or as us evaluating anything. There will be no data collection, so there will be no need for anyone to put in or receive approval for human subjects research. This is really what we consider to be kind of an ideation challenge. So you are developing ideas, and you're providing those ideas to us, and we are evaluating those ideas on the merit of the idea and how you communicate that to us. All right. So we're really focused on the protocol. So I want to talk a little bit about what really we mean by a protocol. So for people who've done research before, this is sort of very familiar to you. But for individuals who haven't been steeped in kind of research methodology and design, a protocol is what we think of as really just a plan for conducting an experiment, a sort of recipe, if you will. So when we think about a protocol as it's applied to the credibility assessment space, we sort of think about a series of questions that we want to ask. So these might include, how exactly are we defining credibility? So is credibility being defined as, a decision about someone's veracity? So are they lying? Are they being truthful? Is it about whether someone is, trustworthy or not? Where exactly is the protocol taking place? So in my couple slides prior, I was talking about research that's done in kind of a lab setting, research that's done more in a field setting where kind of the environmental conditions may match more closely what we'd expect to see in the real world. Next, what will participants actually be asked to do? What will they be asked to think about? What will they be asked to respond to? And a whole series of questions that are really related to kind of giving a participant the experiences they will have that will then be probed or asked about or queried at a later point. What instructions will they receive? So in situations of things like a mock crime, placing or going in another room and taking something from a drawer that, is not theirs. So how will those instructions actually be provided to a participant? How will those participants be motivated? So why are they participating in this? What is kind of guiding their behaviors? And why are they choosing to do things that would be sort of deemed to be credible or not credible? And in the past, I've talked about how oftentimes we've used kind of monetary incentives, but there are other ways to do this. And also, we think about what are the positive and negative consequences to a participant if they are evaluated as credible or not credible. So again, oftentimes people have used things like monetary incentives, but there's also other things. So one example that will show some of the consequences, negative consequences for some individuals, were that they had to give a public speech if they were deemed to be not credible. And so oftentimes people get kind of nervous and stressed out when they have to do public speaking. So, there's a bit of a negative consequence if they were evaluated as not credible. Also, what are the key pieces of information or the actions or decisions that will be used to demonstrate whether a participant or their information is credible? So this really gets at kind of how do we establish kind of ground truth? How do we establish the truth about whether they are credible or not? How does the experimenter objectively record, observe, or otherwise know the truth about this participant's credibility? So how does the participant display this or behave this, and then how do we kind of objectively capture this information about whether they are truly credible or not? And again, this is a really critical point because, as I talked about with some of the limitations of the field studies, the field protocols, oftentimes really objectively knowing the kind of truth about someone's credibility is complicated, and it's sometimes very challenging. And then finally, how do the steps that participants take, and how does this kind of whole set of actions and behaviors and decisions, how do these reflect something that's real? How do these reflect something that reflects how we actually assess credibility in the real world, in our real lives? And is it repeatable? So that's, as I mentioned back at the beginning, this is something we're really interested in, is methods that are not only valid and reliable, but also repeatable. So taken all together, these become sort of the set of actions that really form what we think of as a protocol. And then oftentimes in studies, someone's credibility will then be assessed. So we can see, so I have my arrow pointer here, so hopefully people can see. People's credibility will then be assessed subsequent to performing a set of actions and demonstrating whether they are being credible or not credible. So in the subsequent kind of evaluation period, they are then asked, maybe a series of questions, maybe they are sort of behaviorally evaluated, maybe their speech is evaluated, maybe their physiology or things like their heart rate is evaluated. Some examples of what will happen after this will be, there might be a different kind of interviewing technique that might be evaluated. Here's where things like the polygraph might come into play. And this is really the way for sort of experimenters to kind of test whether we can determine whether someone is credible or not within the context of this experimental protocol. And then eventually they kind of make this determination. So in parallel to that, we have sort of objective truth about whether this individual is credible or not. So on one track, we have basically someone who's trying to suss out or trying to determine whether an individual is credible or not without really knowing whether they are. And then sort of the experimenter, kind of behind the curtain, should know objectively whether this person is being credible or not. So what we're really focused on here in the case challenge is highlighted in green here. So we're really focused on kind of that recipe, those series of questions that we want to answer about how this protocol is formed, what the plan is for conducting this experiment. We also want to know how you would plan to objectively define and gather information about whether someone is truly credible or not credible. So to really kind of highlight this point, what is not the focus of the challenge is after someone has gone through a set of behaviors or gone through a set of actions, how they are then evaluated as credible or not. So kind of again, kind of going back to this idea that here's where sort of existing or new credibility assessment techniques and technologies would come into play, and that's not the focus of this challenge. We're really focused, again, on kind of the methods, the protocol that we're using to get to that point, but not actually the techniques and technologies themselves. All right, so what will we really ask challenge solvers to provide to us? So solvers will develop and provide solutions that address a sort of broad overview, so kind of a summary of the protocol, the goals of that protocol, and any kind of background information that you used or that informed you. And, this can be things like existing research, or this can just be, your inspiration. Maybe it had nothing to do with existing research, and it's really just kind of a kind of idea you had taking a walk one day. So we really want to understand kind of the background information for this. Then moving along kind of the procedure. So describe how the overall design and the duration of the study of the protocol, including the sequence and timing of different actions or events, the roles and responsibilities of different individuals involved. So this is primarily focused on the participant, but some studies have used what we call sort of confederates, so people who are kind of planted in a study to behave or respond in certain ways that allow us to kind of control the action or shape the action in a certain way. So really kind of defining what everyone in the protocol is doing and kind of why they're doing it. Importantly, as I mentioned, procedures must be repeatable by any capable research with this protocol in hand, and with access to any of the necessary resources, whether those resources be, particular physical spaces, particular communication tools, whatever they may be. Critically, objective truth about credibility must be attainable, so you must be able to have some way of defining kind of without question what someone's true credibility is or not. And, sort of important thing to think about is how participants will be motivated, and in particular thinking about how participants will be motivated in a way that they really have a choice about how and when to be credible or not credible. Because we really think this is a key part of how credibility is in the real world, where, sometimes certain behaviors are credible, sometimes they're not. And each one of us has the ability to be credible or not throughout our day. I think about, we think about sort of the little white lies we tell to sort of facilitate our relationships, right? Or really being really adamant about trying to convince someone that we are credible when we're, let's say, going for a new job, or trying to convince someone of, our capabilities. So it's really important that we think about how do we sort of naturally motivate someone to kind of make a choice about how or when they're going to be credible. We're also going to ask solvers to talk a little bit about what are the potential risks that there might be to a participant who would go through this protocol that you're proposing. And, I really want to point out that we do want methods and protocols that are safe, that don't put participants at risk, that don't put them in potential harm's way. So we kind of want you to talk about how you're potentially going to minimize some of those risks. And then I'm talking about kind of what is the real-world applicability of the protocol that you're developing. So how does it really reflect and represent kind of real-life conditions? It doesn't have to look exactly like a real-life setting or situation. It doesn't have to look like, a police precinct. It doesn't have to look like an employee hiring center. But how do elements of the protocol reflect what we see in real life? So when people are highly motivated, or highly kind of stressed about things, are you creating a protocol that will give people that kind of realistic feeling of kind of commitment and potential negative consequences if they can't fully convince someone that they are credible? And finally, kind of a catch-all for any kind of supplementary information. So other information that you may think is sort of relevant to provide that's not really covered in other sections. So one other thing that I just want to point out here is we will, again, be providing a template for these responses. So you don't need to kind of sort of ad hoc create responses for each one of these categories. We will provide a clear template for the things that we want to see, but this is just to kind of give you a sense of the types of things we want you to be thinking about, the types of things we want you to include in these protocols. All right. So we're going to walk through sort of at a high level a sample protocol. Now this is taken from prior research, so this is kind of existing, kind of what we consider to be sort of mock crime, or what we say here, so the mock bomber protocol. So this was from a study done and published in 2008. And the participants in this study were a cadre of U.S. Army basic trainees at a particular training site. So these individuals were recruited into the study, and they were then assigned to basically two different groups. So one was this not credible group, here, shown here, and then one was this credible group, which we kind of categorize as sort of the control group here. So the not credible group was instructed to place the bomb, to arm it, and, if questioned later on, admit knowledge of the bomb, but deny that they were actually involved in it. Okay, so because they were asked to place this bomb and go through with this is sort of establishing them as not credible, when later on they're asked about it and they say, nope, not me, wasn't me, I know that it was done, but it wasn't me. So this sort of deems them as not credible. But again, remember, this is sort of an instructed lie, so this is just an example of prior literature. So what was interesting about this protocol is that after participants sort of planted this fake bomb and armed it, they walked away. and they actually heard a detonation after planting a small bomb. So as we point out here, this is really sort of this close simulation of real-world conditions. So it's a really interesting kind of variable in this sort of relatively kind of controlled experiment. Now, on the other hand, we have participants who are assigned to this control group, or participants who are assigned to be, quote, credible. So these individuals were instructed, they came into the study, they were told that there was going to be this bomb that was going to be armed and placed, but then they were instructed to go to a separate area. They had no sort of contact or no sort of awareness about a person placing a bomb. And then they were told that if they were questioned about their knowledge of their bomb or their personal involvement, they would be completely forthcoming. That they sort of knew about the bomb, but they had no actual involvement in it. So these were individuals who were deemed or assigned to be credible. So across both participant pools, so this really sort of established the consequences, the participants were told that if they're found to be lying, they will have to give a public speech on honesty, integrity, and loyalty. And again, as I mentioned, this is kind of an interesting kind of variable on what we see in a lot of the literature, where instead of just incentivizing people with money, they really incentivize them with something that not a whole lot of people like to do, which is publicly speak. So there's kind of this negative consequence if they weren't able to convincingly or able to convince someone that they were not credible or were credible. All right. So then came the real sort of credibility assessment. So after participants had gone through this set of actions where they're either placing this bomb and then being asked about it, or not placing the bomb and then being asked about it, then they actually go into a room where they are asked about it. So they are asked about whether they had knowledge of the bomb and whether they did it. Now, to be clear, this sort of bar shown in black is really what we deem to be the place where any kind of credibility assessment technique or technology is done. And to be clear, this is not where we're focused on the challenge. So we don't care really about what happens in this black box. What we care about is everything that happens around that black box in white. So then coming out of this kind of black box, this evaluation of whether someone is credible or not, is finally the results. So is this person credible, kind of the determination of that, and does this actually match the ground truth? Does this actually match our objective knowledge about whether this person is credible or not? And in theory, this should be pretty straightforward to evaluate by the end. If you've done a good job at really being clear about how we're capturing kind of objective behavior, objective credibility, and all the steps that are taken to get there. All right, so that is just one sample of the type of protocol that we'd be looking for. And these are the types of categories that we'll be kind of queuing up that people will need to respond to. All right, so just to say it, again, so what the case challenge is not seeking and what we're not aiming to do here. So we're not seeking new technologies or techniques for performing credibility assessment. So we do not want kind of a new polygraph. We don't want a new way to do questioning. The case challenge is really technology agnostic. So we want these protocols to be able to be used for any type of credibility assessment technique or technology, and even ones that haven't been created yet. So that's kind of a really exciting part about this, is that it should be flexible enough to be able to use in really the coming years, potentially coming decades. So the submissions will be in the form of a written protocol that, again, can be used with any technique or technology. And as I mentioned before, we will be providing a template when the challenge actually launches. All right, so potential disqualifiers. So really, we don't want to see sort of new or modified technologies or techniques for assessing credibility. So as I mentioned, no new versions of the polygraph, no new questioning techniques, no new ways that people think that they can evaluate credibility. That's not what we're seeking to do here. We want all the methods around it to give people the experience of being credible or not that then we can test using these different technologies and techniques. We do not want human subjects research studies. So you should not be conducting the study as part of the challenge, and we do not want to be receiving data from studies that you have conducted. And we will not be conducting them as part of our evaluation either. Participants should not submit data from human subject research studies. So not only that you shouldn't actually conduct the research, but we don't want to see any data. And importantly, data won't be a factor in any of the evaluations. So even if you have data from, say, a prior study, or maybe you've just run kind of a simulation, we won't consider that in the evaluation. This is really about the idea. This is really about the idea of the protocol. But, just to be clear, you can cite previous publications. We just don't need to see any data associated with it. And importantly, you can't plagiarize. So, this kind of goes without saying, but we don't want to see anything that we've seen before or that you've basically lifted from somebody else. And I do want to point out that you do need to have the rights for the materials that you submit to us. So, just be mindful of that. If you're creating something new, that shouldn't be a problem, but just be aware of that. All right, so an overview on the scoring. So when you submit your protocol, when you submit kind of your solution to us, the solutions will kind of go through a set of triage steps, which I'll talk about next, but when they successfully go through that triage step, they will be shared with a panel of evaluators. The panel of evaluators will not know who submitted a solution, so this will be kind of a blind evaluation. And each protocol will be evaluated separately. So this means that, we won't be comparing them against one another. So that's not really what we have in mind. We want to see, each individual submission on its own. It also means that if you choose to submit more than one, we won't be evaluating them together. So we won't look at, all the submissions from Joe. We will be looking at them again as, solver 1 versus, solver 10. And each evaluation is going to be evaluated separately. So solvers can submit multiple solutions. That's completely fine, but they will be independently evaluated. And importantly, the protocols are really based on, the evaluation of the protocols are really based on what you put in your submission, really the text of the submission, and again, not on results previously conducted. All right, so the details of the scoring. So we'll have kind of two phases. So we're going to go through kind of an initial triage phase, as I mentioned. So we'll do kind of an initial, what we're calling compliance review, just to make sure that you sort of answered all the different categories that we're asking for, and that you comply with any other sort of challenge requirements. So, for instance, you haven't included data. You don't expect us to kind of experimentally evaluate it. So we just want to do a basic check to make sure you've hit everything that we're asking for. And then once we get through that point, sort of submissions that pass through that initial phase, we'll move on to phase 2, where we will have the scoring panel. So members of the scoring panel will individually score each submission that does pass compliance review. And then the scores will be based on a set of predefined evaluation criteria. And the scoring panel will be comprised of kind of technical experts in this area. At this point, we're not going to sort of name who the panel members are, but they will be people who have technical expertise in this area in terms of conducting research like this, in terms of evaluating research like this, and they'll have an appreciation for kind of what new and novel is, as well as ways to make these protocols valid and reliable and repeatable. All right, so listed here is a set of the criteria that we are aiming for in the challenge. And I want to point out this is really just a sample of our scoring criteria. We still will probably sort of refine these a little bit, but these are really the main things we're looking for. So really sort of top is kind of credibility, scientific credibility of your approach. So again, as I mentioned, we want the protocols to generate valid, reliable, and repeatable outcomes. And we won't have a way of really demonstrating this because, again, we're not running experiments. But based on the way that you think about designing the protocol, the way that you think about capturing ground truth, the way that you think about kind of motivating individuals, we'll be able to have a good sense of whether, this is at least repeatable, but also whether it's likely to kind of represent a true assessment of credibility assessment in a way that's both valid and reliable. So So the second sort of criteria we have is about real-world applicability. So we want to make sure that the protocol kind of reflects something in the real world, the way sort of credibility occurs or the way we try to demonstrate it in the real world, or kind of different conditions or settings under which we are typically evaluating credibility. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, I evaluate the credibility in my home setting, is my husband being truthful with me right now, but we also do it in professional settings. So the sort of settings and conditions are sort of wide open for kind of creative juices to flow at this point. We also are really looking for kind of novel approaches. So between me and the team that is assembled here today and really supporting on this challenge, we have a really good, I think, understanding of the existing research around this. And so we're looking for kind of new ways. We're looking for really innovative approaches. And we want ideas that have real strong grounding in good research design and methodology, but are really thinking outside the box. And lastly, we do want submissions that have taken participant safety into consideration. So again, we do not want submissions that are going to put participants at risk, that are going to harm participants, and harm can occur in many forms, right? It can be physical harm, it can be mental or sort of emotional harm. So we really want people to be developing protocols that adhere to human subjects protection guidelines. And in our references, in our resources list at the end, that's a guide to you, we have a link to some human subjects protection guidelines that are offered by sort of a leading professional society in this area. So at the challenge release, these criteria will have kind of specific point values associated with them. So you'll have a much better idea of kind of how we're weighting these different categories and criteria and specifically what we're looking for then. All right, so the total prize purse that is potentially on the line here is up to $100,000. So we don't anticipate one $100,000 prize. We're expecting this to be kind of allocated across a series of levels or a series of different kind of challenges that we want to see how people are able to solve. So overall, though, the total amount of prize funding will be up to $100,000. It's also important to point out that we don't have to award that money. So we're really looking for good new solutions. And if we don't see that, then we can maybe use that prize money for a different challenge or a different prize competition. So we'll really be looking intently to see about the quality of the submissions and whether we're really getting what we want out of it. So we will expect to have a workshop at the end of this challenge, following the close of the sort of submission part of the challenge, and selected winners from our evaluation panel will be given a travel award to attend this challenge workshop. And we really do want to incentivize people who submitted to have the opportunity to travel to this workshop, to present and talk at this workshop, and to get together with others from academia, from across the government, from the private sector, and really others who are interested in this topic to try to advance kind of our ideas about how we can develop, other methods and protocols for evaluating credibility assessment techniques and technologies. And really, as I mentioned, before, really kind of coalesce this community that hopefully will be very diverse in background and offer some new and maybe different ways of looking at the problem. All right, so just a quick note about intellectual property. So it is the solver's responsibility to ensure they have the right to distribute the intellectual property. That's not sort of the responsibility that we take on. You really have to be sure that you've covered your bases if you choose to submit a response. You'll be asked to sign a form stating that you do have the rights to the IP as part of the registration or the submission process for the challenge. And it is expected that solvers will make your solutions publicly available. Now, this can be in the form of publications. This can be in the form of making, the kind of recipe or the protocol kind of open source. It's up to you. But we really want this challenge, again, to kind of stem future innovation and future research. So we want you to be able to share kind of the best practices, hopefully, that you'll be contributing to and developing with a broader community of people who are researching this topic, of people who are interested in developing technologies in this area, of the government who's kind of evaluating these technologies and wants new tools in their toolkit to do this. All right. So now we are moving into the last section of the formal kind of content here. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of these slides, and then we'll move into the Q&A portion. So participation in the challenge. So a couple kind of clear rules up front. So in order to be eligible, you must be over 18 years of age, and you must be able to submit the protocol in clear, grammatically correct English. My grammar's not that great, so it's a pretty low bar. Okay, we are also inviting participation from people from around the world. So we really want diversity in thought, experience, and background. So we realize we need to go beyond sort of the U.S. boundaries, so we invite submissions from people abroad, overseas, and in other countries. Also, really, the CASE challenge is looking for solutions from anyone who thinks they may have a way of addressing the problem. So we want to sort of hopefully inspire and encourage people who've been thinking about this problem for a long time, but we also really want to engage and invite people who haven't been thinking about this problem for a long time. We really want to try to get some new ideas and invite people who don't normally think about this type of research. So people who maybe this is just something that they're perusing and looking at in their weekend time, when they're not working their full daytime job, or someone who just comes from a completely different field or different expertise. We really want to, using these kind of challenges allows us to kind of throw out our notion of who's an expert in this and really sort of open it to a much broader community who may have some really interesting ideas. All right. So in terms of the timeline, so today is our Virtual Participants Day, so this is July 31st, 2018. We expect to release the challenge in the fall of 2018. Unfortunately, I don't have a kind of finer date than that, but at this point we do expect it to be fall of 2018. Then we expect the submission deadline, I apologize, the date on this is wrong, should be winter, spring of 2019. So we will correct that in the slides that we post online. But we do expect submissions will be collected a few months after the challenge is opened, so that kind of winter, spring timeline. And then we'll conduct our evaluations for kind of 1 to 3 months, depending on a series of things. So we expect those to finish up by spring 2019, and then notify winners about who's kind of gotten a travel prize and can travel to the workshop. And then we plan to have a workshop where, again, we bring together challenge participants, people from across the government, from across academia, from across the private sector, to have this workshop sometime in summer 2019. And when we actually formally launch the challenge, of course, these dates will be much clearer and much more well-defined. All right. So I want to point out that this has not been solely developed and contributed to by IARPA. In fact, we have really partnered heavily and drawn heavily from the expertise and knowledge of some key critical partners. The first of which is the National Center for Credibility Assessment, or NCCA. So they are the federal home or the Center for Credibility Assessment Education, Training, Oversight, as well as research and development and kind of vetting and verifying new credibility assessment techniques and technologies. So they've really been critical in providing content and input to develop the challenge, to guide the direction of the challenge, and so they continue to play a very strong and important role in this challenge, and we really thank them for their input. Also, we have had really great sort of technical contributions from Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab. They are a university-affiliated research center affiliated with Johns Hopkins University, and they've really played a critical part in kind of defining the technical content and technical scope of this challenge, as well as helping to kind of manage and set up and organize and kind of run this. So this is just to say, IARPA is not the only one playing a role here. We have many sort of smart minds and individuals really contributing here, and we thank them all for their contributions. All right. We've listed out here a few frequently asked questions. These are just some initial ones that we've thought of. I will go through each one of them just to kind of briefly address them, but they will be here in the slides for you to refer to afterwards. I really want to underscore, though, that we want to invite your questions. So we will go through some of the questions shortly, but also following this informational session, if you have other questions that you think about, maybe a day, a week, a month from now, or maybe as you're reviewing the slides, or maybe if you share this information with some friends or colleagues, we really want you to provide questions to us before we officially launch the challenge. It will help us, I think, improve the clarity and what we're asking for, and knowing what your questions are will really help us do that. All right, so in terms of the first question, so the best place to find out more information about the CASE challenge is really on our IARPA.gov webpage. You will submit your completed protocol through kind of a challenge launch site, which we will have, and we'll provide the details of that at challenge launch. Again, no limit on the number of protocols you can submit, and we'll be evaluating them all independently. Kind of an important one I think to point out here is, will there be access to any IARPA data or experts while developing our protocols? No. So we will not be providing access to people who may have really deep expertise about how these things are used in practice, say, in the federal government. We won't be providing access to any sort of existing data. Again, this is really sort of a call for new, interesting ideas about how to measure these things, and this is, we will be providing any resources to help you out there. All right. Is there a preference for field-based over lab-based protocols? I mean, we've certainly talked about the limitations of each one of these and how there's, probably more research representing issue-specific research rather than screening-based research. But we are really accepting protocols that address lab, field-type demonstrations that tackle issue-specific or more screening-based protocols. So we're really kind of open to receiving things. Interestingly, can the protocol include actions that happen in virtual spaces? Yes, definitely. We really want to think broadly and kind of creatively about how to develop a protocol and implement it. Should the protocol submissions be limited to interview-based techniques for credibility assessment, such as is the case with polygraph examinations? The clear answer is no. So again, just to kind of highlight it one more time, we're not interested in developing or advancing kind of credibility assessment techniques and technologies. The protocols that we're asking for in this challenge should be really agnostic or kind of blind to any specific technique or technology that's being used. And in particular, we want it to be adaptive and useful going forward in the future. So thinking about things that haven't even been developed yet. So it should be flexible enough to account for future developments. All right, and as I mentioned, we certainly want to have more FAQs, which again, we hope to launch with the official challenge and help us develop them. So you have the email address. It's listed at the bottom of the slide. It's listed in other places, so we ask you to kind of submit those to us, going forward. All right, so with that, we've come to the end of our sort of formal part of this informational session. We're going to take a couple of minutes just to take a breather and take a quick look and kind of at some of the questions that we received during the session. And I do want to draw your attention to following the questions. We do have a set of slides focused on terminology. I'll just quickly let you scan through the terminology. 2 slides on that, and then some recommended reading. So I'm just going to leave it on the recommended reading slide for a moment while we quickly take a break, and we'll be back in approximately 2 or so minutes. All right, so we are back on. I was just quickly scanning through the questions that came in, so thank you to everyone who did log a question with us. Go back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the question and then I'm going to provide an answer. And as I mentioned, please, feel free to provide additional questions throughout this, and we can, if we don't have time, we can always take it offline and answer it at a later time. So the first question we got, which is pretty straightforward to answer, so can we ask questions leading up to the official release of the challenge? Absolutely. Please do. Send us as many questions as you have. You know, we'd even welcome comments. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of a question. So if you have sort of suggestions or feedback, we certainly are interested in hearing what you have to say. So the web address, or excuse me, the email address is casechallenge, all one word, at IARPA.gov. And that goes to a sort of team of individuals. So we will respond and hopefully get back to you in short order with a response. All right, next question. Doesn't the fact that I can teach a person how to control every tracing on the polygraph chart indicate that the polygraph is not accurate as a method of credibility assessment? So this is sort of, we got a couple of questions kind of around this topic, so I'm just going to kind of address them all in one here. And really the straightforward answer to this is that we're looking for protocols to evaluate the methods. So polygraph-specific questions are outside the scope of this briefing and this challenge. So again, we are not focused at all on what happens when you may enter into a room where a polygraph may be present or where people may ask questions about whether you are credible or not. That is really the black box that we don't care about in this challenge. We care about the experiences you give to a participant prior to getting to that point, and how you motivate them to behave in ways that are credible or not. So again, we are really agnostic to kind of the specific credibility assessment technique or technology. All right. So next question. Can you explain more about the tools and techniques that you're not interested in? Why not an evolution of these? Yeah, so there's lots of research going on right now to try to you know, evaluate and develop new tools and techniques to assess credibility, and that's a really healthy and interesting area of research. It's just not what the challenge is focused on. So we are really agnostic to any credibility assessment tools or technologies. So we really, in the future, want to be able to use, hopefully, one of these protocols that's developed to really assess a broad range of tools and techniques. In fact, we don't even know what some of those may be in the future. So we want this protocol to be kind of flexible enough to be used as tools and technologies are developing and advancing, because we know that they are. So we want sort of new protocols to be able to evaluate those. All right. Next question. Do you want it to be overt or covert? So we're not entirely sure what this is in reference to, but if you're asking about whether the individual knows whether their credibility is being assessed, protocols can certainly inform or not inform the participants about whether their credibility is being assessed. But those protocols that do not inform subjects a priori may require some form of subject debrief at the end. So oftentimes it can be a little more challenging to run a protocol or study where people don't know exactly all the steps that are involved, what's being asked of them or what's being evaluated about them, but it's certainly doable. So you just need to think about that in the protocol. So if instead the question is about overt versus covert credibility assessment techniques or technologies, again, we're not really focused on that part of that, that part of the evaluation in this challenge. We're looking for protocols to evaluate credibility assessments, not the specific techniques or technologies. All right, next question. The sample experiment that was shown shows people actually being aware of the experiment. Are you open, since our method only involves some data, not a person's name, or from there, you can go back or forward on their actions. So are you open to providing some data, and we identify those candidates that have an issue with credibility? We will not be providing or receiving any data as part of the current challenge, but the methods that describe how determinations can be made from data collected within your proposed protocol are certainly welcome. And if we sort of missed something about that question, please feel free to follow up. All right, so this is a slightly longer question, but I am going to read it. So, about the subjects or examinees. Okay. So I guess this person offers that in their credibility assessment lab, they have found that there's a wide range of interest in credibility assessment based on the participants' rights and risk. So what is at stake? A company laying bricks is less interested in a continuous credibility assessment method, low risk, for employment, whereas a high-risk entity may be interested in continuous evaluation, such as government entities. So the legal system is more interested in this specific issue as opposed to continuous evaluation. Narrowing the recipient or the examinee will narrow the scope better for this, or am I missing something? So yeah, this is a really interesting point that across all these different applications, kind of the tools we bring to the table might be different, and thus the protocols might be different. So the credibility assessment methods that can be utilized broadly across populations and techniques and technologies are really preferred. So we're really kind of interested in things that could be used for different application spaces and across different populations and across these different kinds of sort of risk profiles that the person who's asking the question is really referring to. You can certainly propose population-specific or kind of application or domain-specific ideas, and we'll certainly evaluate those in the context of the specific evaluation criteria that we'll provide you at the challenge launch. So if you have ideas that are specific to specific populations or applications, please provide those. We certainly would love ones that do generalize, but we realize that can certainly be challenging. So we really want to see all the ideas. We don't want to limit people too early on. All right, next question. Should the protocol assume that the researcher has no knowledge about the theoretical and creative background of the credibility assessment technique under investigation? Knowledge about today's credibility assessment techniques may be useful in designing technique-agnostic protocols, but the protocol itself should not be dependent on information specific to any one credibility assessment technique. So, I mean, you can certainly understand how these things may be used, but again, they should be agnostic to the specific way in which credibility is being assessed or evaluated. All right, who will compose the panel that does the evaluations? Are you going to have polygraph examiners involved in this process? So we haven't yet released the names of the members of the scoring panel, but as I mentioned, they will be comprised of technical experts. They may include polygraph examiners, but they will include people from diverse backgrounds who understand credibility assessment protocols, who understand credibility assessment techniques and technologies, and maybe people who are, more research-oriented, as well as people who may be more sort of practice-oriented, and so may apply these actually in their job. But we do have sort of a diverse panel in mind, but one that is qualified and sort of knows this area. So next question. One of the disqualifiers states nothing new, but with novelty, it states new and original. I'm confused. I see. So, right, so I apologize for that. So the submission disqualifications on slide 28 specifically refers to new or modified credibility assessment techniques or technologies. So the actual sort of tools that we use to evaluate credibility assessment, not the protocols we use. So we are interested in novel or new evaluation protocols. We are not interested in novel or new credibility assessment techniques or technologies. Okay, I think we just got another question. So another question we received, will you publish questions and answers leading up to the challenge release? So our intent is to do that. So our intent is to release kind of these FAQs, the frequently asked questions that we have growing, though we will probably evaluate whether we need to kind of post all of them. Some of them I expect will be more specific kind of guidance or feedback to us. So ones that have sort of broader relevance to kind of the solver community, we will certainly make sure that those are made available to everyone. We will see whether we can do those prior to the challenge release, but certainly at the challenge release we'll have a much broader list of frequently asked questions. Another question we received is, will all submissions be published? So a detailed answer to this question will be provided at challenge launch. But winning submissions are expected to be shared. As I mentioned, we do want the submissions to be kind of a common good or a public good to really inspire and advance research and practice going forward. So we do want people to be willing to kind of share their solutions. But we will provide a specific answer to that question at a later time, at least by challenge release or launch. Okay. I believe that's all the questions we have. So I would really like to thank everyone on the call, on the WebEx, who took the time out of your day to listen in, to log in, to ask questions. I hope that you will continue to share information and questions with us as we move forward to challenge launch. We're really excited about this, and we really hope that we motivate people to think creatively and innovatively about new solutions to this problem, because it is one that we think has really exciting and interesting impact both on research but also on actual sort of real-world practice and application. So with that, you know where to reach us at the casechallenge@iarpa.gov, and you can look on the IARPA.gov website, and within the next few days we'll be posting the slides as well as the audio. And again, thank you everyone for participating, and we look forward to hearing from you. All right, thanks.